Welcome back to MMA Talking Heads, the internet MMA show that handles all things mixed martial arts. I'm your host, Jason Probst, and with us, co-hosting this week, is the one and the only Danny Acosta. Danny, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Jason. It's been a long time coming.
Absolutely, man, absolutely. We want to jump into a couple items here. We're going to preview UFC 142 with the big fight this weekend, Jose Aldo defending against Chad Mendes. First thing we want to touch base in is the recent news that Strikeforce women's champion and pretty much the uber female in MMA, Christiane Cyborg Santos, tested positive for Winstrol, a positive steroid test recently, which pretty much threw the whole women's game into chaos. What are your thoughts on this, Danny?
I was at her last fight. I was there on December 17th when she destroyed Yamanaka. And my thought after the fight was like, I can't believe they pay her to do this. I can't believe they pay her to come in and run roughshod over everybody when she only puts in 14 seconds of work because there's no one near her in terms of competitive level at 145 pounds. And it's unfortunate now that all the dominance that she's exhibited, whether it was Gina Carano or Marlis Kunin or whoever it may be, legitimate female mixed martial artists that she's essentially taken out in the cage, you have to call those things into question now because, as everybody suspected, she is on, some kind of steroid. This is something that they use with cows to give them lean muscle mass and help with, in humans, the weight cut. So it's very unfortunate, and I disagree with Dana White that this kills female MMA. I'm on Team Coker on this, that female MMA will be fine without Christiane Cyborg Santos, and, let it be a lesson. You can't do this without getting a year's suspension, losing out on all kinds of money, and having your reputation called into question, rightfully so.
Yeah, well said. And I thought the interesting thing is, when we go back to people testing positive for performance-enhancing drugs, whether it's Sean Shirk, Nate Marquardt, even Fernando Vargas, when he fought De La Hoya, he said his trainer had given him a mystery substance. It seems like there's always a new excuse entered into the pantheon of defenses. I think if I ever pop positive, I'm just going to blame you. Acosta put it in my espresso. I was on deadline. Things happen. And her defense was somebody slipped it into like an energy drink or something like that. It was, to me, I was thinking, your average supply at Winstrol is probably, fairly expensive. I don't know if an energy drink company is just going to be slipping these into energy drinks so people get like toned up. I thought that was pretty weak in terms of the steroid defense. What were your thoughts on the plausibility of, I guess, the energy drink defense?
No, it's ridiculous. First and foremost, I look at it like going to a bar and your friend's trying to feed you shots on ice. You have to call into question what he's trying to feed you. You know what I mean?
Right.
Especially as a professional athlete, you have to know what you're consuming at all times. My first thought was like, oh, this is like Barry Bonds in the cream. Barry Bonds was like, oh, I didn't know it was steroids in the cream that I was rubbing in my body. It's like, well, then why were you rubbing it on your body? Same thing with Cyborg, and there's a very real issue of performance-enhancing drugs in mixed martial arts.
Absolutely.
Brought up every time this happens, and we keep hearing the same tired excuses, whether it's from Chael Sonnen or, I think the only people who were honest about it were, Stephan Bonner, Hermes Franca, and Chris Lieben. Franca and Bonner were like, well, I was trying to recover to be able to make the fight.
Right.
And Chris Lieben said, well, I cycled wrong, which is about as honest as you could get. And they still have jobs in mixed martial arts. That's fine, but I think there needs to be more regulation by the UFC. It's obviously something where they don't have control over what the athletes are doing, but being that they are the end game in mixed martial arts, they need to take an extra step, I think, to make sure that steroids are completely wiped out. The commissions only do so much. How aloof are commissions a lot of the time in cases like this or wrong? The commissions only go so far, even though this is one of two sports regulated by the government. There's still more work that can be done, and I think the UFC does amazing things like provide health insurance for fighters and all the things that they have been doing. This would be something else that they could do that reflects really positively on their organization because there's no union in the UFC, because they don't have certain labor things in place like the NFL and Major League Baseball and the NFL.
No, and I think this is really, they need to look at it as an opportunity to really take some dramatic steps to really correct some things. And, I think some things that really are on the table now that maybe weren't previously. Year-round testing, random surprise testing. Because the thing is a lot of people sort of have this dismissive attitude, well, everyone's on it, it doesn't matter. And I always think of the guy, the athlete, like a guy like Jeremy Horn, who's been very outspoken about steroids. Is what about the athlete that doesn't want to do it and knows that he may be at a competitive disadvantage, despite the fact that he doesn't want to do it. We need to protect the sport for those guys and to make testing much more rigorous than it is. So I think the Cyborg thing, it'll shake itself out. There is life after a positive test, but definitely a difficult blow, especially as she was kind of the more or less the figurehead of women's MMA. But, that being said, moving on to UFC 142 this weekend in Rio, we're going to break down the whole card. Got an exciting main event. Jose Aldo defending his featherweight title against unbeaten contender Chad Mendes. I wanted to start at the bottom of the card, Danny, and kind of get some of your breakdown and picks. Good 5 fights on the main card. Probably not going to sell as much in the wake of the Lesnar-Overeem mega fight, but I think expectations are low. But I want to jump into this first fight in the card. Edson Barboza against Terry Edom in a lightweight match. What are your thoughts on this fight?
I think it's a great fight. I think Terry Edom came back. He really made sure that there was no rust and brought the momentum back. But this is a fight that he's being brought on to lose, essentially, fighting Barboza on his home turf. And Barboza is a great striker in his own right. And I think he's definitely going to have an advantage when it comes to physicality and, clinch work and everything like that. I think for Terry Edom, his key here is to really do his best to impose his will out the gate, to get in Barboza's face, because Barboza, at a distance, you don't want to be on the outside range with him. You don't want to be, in mid-range with him, because he's going to land a lot of strikes. I mean, this is his bread and butter. So I think it's a very competitive fight to kick off the main card, and this is the kind of fight that you want to see.
No, and I agree. This is definitely, when Barboza debuted against Mike Lulo, beat him in 3 rounds with just a massacre of leg kicks. I saw the guy, and I thought, this guy is the future of the lightweight division. Then he proceeded, very close fight with Anthony Njokuani, squeaked by Ross Pearson. And I think my assessment at that point changed. He's a very talented guy, but I don't know if he's having problems making the weight, but it seems like he has X amount of bullets he can shoot,
Absolutely.
He'll do amazing things. His kicks are phenomenal. His technique is flawless, but then he'll kind of lull, and let the other guy back in the fight. And I definitely think that Edom is the ideal opponent for him. He's not going to have the kind of wrestling to take Barboza down. He's a big target, and he's going to be there to be hit. And I think this is definitely kind of sort of a homecoming game and to get a big win for the hometown guy. So I like Barboza big in that fight. Moving on, another lightweight bout. Thiago Tavares against Sam Stout. A couple of veterans here. What are your thoughts?
I think Sam Stout's going to be able to pull this out. Tavares, as much as I've been a fan of him for a long time, and he's got the home field advantage, he seems to find a way to lose despite all of his virtues as a fighter.
Right.
And Sam Stout shows more and more preparation. He shows more and more readiness with every performance. And I think this is no difference. George Roop wasn't able to do it. Mark Hominick wasn't able to do it, pulling off the win after Sean Tompkins passed away, unfortunately. But I think Sam Stout's going to be the one to break that mold. I think he's going to be able to be the guy who comes into Brazil on the main card and comes away successfully.
No, and definitely an interesting match. I like Stout. I like his stand-up. Always been a big fan of him, especially his 2 amazing wars with Spencer Fisher. If you want to see a great 2-way stand-up bout, watch his second fight with Spencer Fisher. That is a kickboxing match with few equals. I think Tavares may be a little bit too big. He may be able to kind of lay and pray this one, for lack of a better term. But I think that he's maybe just a little bit too strong for Stout. But it's going to be interesting while it lasts. Obviously, Stout can end the fight at any time with the strike. Moving on the card, we have a late sub in Ricardo Funch filling in for Paulo Thiago against veteran Mike Pyle. What are your thoughts on this one?
Mike Pyle, I think, is a guy who needs to perform in the cage. Everybody knows how he does in the gym. He's a top guy, trains with a lot of tough guys, and he seems to always lose at inopportune times, especially coming over to the UFC after a long time being elsewhere, whether it was IFL or, Elite XC or in all the places he's been. I think Ricardo Funch is the opponent for him to do that. I don't think that Ricardo Funch is going to be able to do anything to Mike Pyle that Mike Pyle hasn't seen, which is pretty much the standard for every Mike Pyle fight. Everybody can say that going against Mike Pyle, but usually the opponent has enough, like a Jake Ellenberger, to really put him out there and show him what's what at welterweight. But I think Pyle's got this soundly. He's too much of a veteran. He's too crafty, and I think he can't afford a mental lapse. You got to remember too, he beat Hathaway when Hathaway was the favorite, and Hathaway was in his round. This is a kind of occasion that is not going to faze Mike Pyle.
Yeah, and the thing about Mike Pyle is you see a guy who's got a great gym reputation, trained with a lot of top people. A guy that just can't quite get over the hump, but a guy that's had to really take some tough hands. I think it was his first fight in the UFC. Brock Larson, he had to lose like 20 pounds in one night, when he lost, and everybody's like, oh, who's this guy? He's kind of a guy that's had to take a lot of tough deals to step in there to get his foot in the water. And I think, Funch coming off, he's had 1 month's notice, so he should be reasonably in shape. But I think this is a good win for Pyle. And maybe a bit of a referendum on how good Rory McDonald is, a guy that I'm high on, who dispatched, totally took Pyle out. I think it was a little bit misleading with Pyle's overall skills. He's a better fighter than that. But I think this is an easy win for Pyle. Styles make fights, and I think he'll have the wrestling. And I did think his performance against Hathaway was very inspiring, especially for me as an older guy, seeing a guy like Pyle, who's getting up there in years, take out an unbeaten guy in front of his hometown. So, moving on to the semi-main event, Anthony Johnson moves up to 185 pounds. Now, this isn't against anybody. It's against Victor Belfort. Very dangerous fight. Johnson's problems making the weight have been well chronicled. The guy walks around at a solid 210, 220 pounds. Doesn't have to cut down to 170 anymore. Moving up to middleweight, but against Victor Belfort. What do you think of the matchmaking behind this fight, and why debut at middleweight against Belfort?
Because Anthony Johnson is, in fact, a light heavyweight cutting to middleweight. He was never a welterweight at all. He was always a light heavyweight or a middleweight cutting down to 170 and not making the weight. This is a guy who missed weight by 7 pounds at one point. So I'm glad to see that he's finally given up the notion that he needs that size advantage to fight at welterweight. And he's actually being rewarded here because the middleweight division is kind of slim on contenders. Anthony Johnson, 2 great wins against Dan Hardy and Charlie Brenneman, coming up to middleweight. So, he's definitely going to bring a lot of different things. I think he's going to look to grind out Vitor. And I think what's important for Vitor Belfort here is tough Brazil and a rematch with Anderson Silva. This is a guy who's accomplished pretty much anything you need to accomplish in the sport, but doesn't have the concrete legacy that a guy like Randy Couture has, that a guy like Chuck Liddell has. Vitor always seems to be on the wrong end when it matters, fighting guys like Dan Henderson, Chuck Liddell, Randy Couture, and all the great names of the sport. I think this is a fight for him to stay afloat, for him to really usher in a lot of excitement for Tough Brazil, and a rematch with Vanderlei Silva. That'll be a mega fight that will likely take place in Brazil. And I think Vitor needs to know that this is a real tough test to him, because Anthony Johnson is very dangerous standing, power-wise. He's got a lot of different tools, but more than likely, he's going to try and grind on Vitor and test Vitor where he's failed in the past, and that's off his back, going against a guy who's really going to put the physicality against him.
The interesting thing was, Danny, as you bring that point, grinding it out, 2 things come to mind. When Anthony Johnson fought Dan Hardy, we remember the billing. A couple guys are going to stand in slug. It's going to be a slugfest, slugger's delight. And what does Johnson do? He goes out, completely wrestle smashes Hardy, holds him down for 3 rounds, dominates him. And for us, the people that know the guy's credentials, was like, hey, there's the wrestling that we always heard about and we knew he had. Does he use it against Belfort? Because Belfort's incredibly tough to take down. Randy Couture had to fight a lot to get him down. Tito Ortiz, when they fought in 2005, I think I counted it was like a 2-minute struggle to get Vitor down. Does he necessarily go and just go for the takedown early, or is he going to test the water standing?
He's not going to test the water standing. He's not scared to stand. He could stand, but it's the only way Vitor Belfort has a surefire way to win this fight. He's not going to win it off his back. He's not going to get on top and get ground and pound, because Anthony Johnson's going to have a size advantage, even though he's the one coming up in weight. This is a fight that Vitor Belfort wins based on his hand speed and his boxing. Vitor Belfort's training with Georges St. Pierre. He's training with Ray Sefo, his stand-up. So Vitor Belfort, people always talk about him not performing. He's done everything in his UFC return to perform. He's aligned himself with all the right guys. He's training hard. I think he's mentally there. I think Vitor Belfort wins this based on his hand speed. I think he's going to be able to catch Anthony Johnson. Anthony Johnson, for my money, is still relatively untested at this level. He's done a good streak, like I talked about. But I think when it comes down to it, Vitor Belfort has 15 minutes to catch Anthony Johnson, and he's going to be able to do that. Once he hits you, he's going to finish you. That's the way it goes. I think he's going to have 15 minutes to do that, as long as he doesn't mentally break, which is a huge possibility he will. But like I said, I think Vitor is in a good place right now, and he's going to be ready for this.
The interesting thing, when I was writing my preview for MMA Mania, I looked up Vitor's record, and all of his UFC wins are first-round KOs, 9 for 9. It's almost like he either gets you in the first round and gets the knockout of the night, or probably loses. And I think that's the interesting part, is I think for Anthony Johnson, that first round, not even the first round, those first 2 minutes are really key, that he doesn't get caught, because nobody catches you like Vitor, and swarms like him. There's nobody in the business that can do it. Not Anderson Silva, not Jose Aldo. Nobody can put together as much fury in one sequence as Vitor Belfort, and that's what makes him so dangerous. So I think I'm going to go with an upset in this one. I think I'm going to go with Johnson. Just the sort of the youth and a bigger upside. I think it's a bigger fight for him than it is for Belfort. And I know it sounds a little crazy, and he could get blown out in 30 seconds, but I think Johnson's going to take this one by a late TKO or decision. So definitely be a fun one to watch. Now on to the main event, Jose Aldo making the third defense of his UFC featherweight title against unbeaten challenger Chad Mendes. Got a lot of good story coming into this one. Got Aldo defending his belt against one of Uriah Faber's guys, whom he leg kicked into Bolivia, figuratively speaking, a few years ago. Mendes looking to get some payback for Team Alpha Male and the other guy's turf. How does this bout break down, especially, Danny, in light of Aldo's two last title defenses, which were a little subpar in spots?
You know, people say that about Aldo, that he had subpar outings in his last two fights. I don't agree with that. I think he actually dominated Mark Hominick, but it was overshadowed by the dramatic fifth round when Hominick was able to rally. He didn't do much damage to Aldo, but he got him down, and he was able to make it look more competitive than it actually was. And for Kenny Florian, I think it was just a matter of Aldo stifling Kenny Florian and not being in any danger at any point. You know, he could have definitely put away Kenny Florian, but you know, Kenny Florian's a very hard guy to put away, and he came ready to fight. You know, I just think based on those two performances, you can't say that Aldo isn't a guy who's on a 10-fight win streak under Zuffa. He's a killer. You know, he's not someone who leaves any room to be damaged or hurt. You know, he's got great slips with his boxing. His offense is the most potent form of maim and kill that I've ever seen. He's going to hurt your leg to the point where you can't move, and when you can't move, he's going to take you out. I think that's going to be the case here against Chad Mendes. I think Chad Mendes' best bet is to get in Aldo's face and try and smash him inside. You know, I don't think it's going to be to try and strike with him. That'd be unwise. And I don't think it's going to be the takedowns. I think Aldo's going to be ready for that. I think Mendes can't get desperate because Aldo's got such lethal knees. I think he's going to be ready to get inside and dirty box with them, you know, throw combos, create a firefight, I think is Chad Mendes' best bet, because Chad Mendes is relentless. He's tough. He's got a chin, and he's going to come forward. And those are the reasons why he's the best contender for Aldo, not just right now, but that we've seen Aldo defend against since Uriah Faber.
Right, and see, this is the interesting thing, and I found it interesting. You know, I covered Chad Mendes when he turned pro. I've watched him progress, and I've pretty much seen all of his fights several times. And, you know, a lot of people knock him as boring or, you know, lay and pray or wrestler or whatever, and that's fine. I mean, they have their right to not appreciate certain aspects of the sport. But I see a guy that I've never seen get tired, never seen him in too much trouble, a guy that's completely shut down some very good jiu-jitsu people, although not on Aldo's level, obviously, and a guy that has a very good chin and is getting better with every fight. And I just think that over a 5-round fight, that's kind of a handful for a guy that I think has had some problems making weight, has not been... I don't think Aldo's been quite the monster he was against Faber. I mean, if you look at his strike output, he still does amazing things. The first 2 rounds of Hominick, I think he would have put away almost anybody but Mark Hominick, just because Hominick's such a tough kickboxer. But I think the interesting thing is the longer the fight goes, the better Mendes' chances get. And the guy's unbeaten. I mean, maybe he's not super exciting to all fans all the time, but he's very dominant and he can get in your face. And, you know, with that camp of Joseph Benavidez and Faber, I think he's going to have great submission defense and positional grappling. And I think it's the longer the fight goes, obviously, the better his chances go. What's your pick for the Aldo Mendes fight?
I'm going with Aldo. You know, actually, I had the same pick as Mauro Ranallo when I was on his show on Monday, and that's Aldo via 3rd-round TKO. You know, I think Chad Mendes could be the guy to take out Aldo. It just may not be that time. You know, I definitely think that you have to consider, like Phil Davis coming up against Rashad Evans, a guy like Mendes is gym time. It's all about gym time for him. In the cage, he's going to perform. They perform at the high level. That's what these guys do. It's just a matter of how much gym time they have to become before they are champions. He progresses leaps and bounds, but I still think at the end of the day, you know, he had trouble taking down Eric Koch. We've seen that his takedowns aren't impenetrable. He's got a lot of positive things going for him against this fight, but he's still facing one of the pound-for-pound best in the sport, and I see Aldo, again, maiming and killing his opponent, you know, especially in Brazil, headlining a card. This is what Jose Aldo has dreamed of. Aldo is trying to become Anderson Silva, and this is going to be one of those breakout performances for him.
I will say that I will go with, if it goes past 2 rounds, Mendes wins. That's my qualifier. I think Mendes is going to be a little bit better in the stand-up than people think. He's obviously not going to outpoint Aldo, but I think he can nail him to transition into a takedown. I think if he goes into the third round, I think Chad Mendes runs him out of gas and wins a decision. And I think that Aldo's days at 145 are numbered. I think he's just had too much problems making that weight, but it's going to be very exciting to watch, especially the first 2 rounds. And, unbeaten challenger taking on a top 3 pound-for-pound fighter. That's as much as anybody could ask for. So, Danny, any sites you want to plug, who you're writing for, and how can fans get hold of you on Twitter and email?
Yeah, fans could follow me on twitter.com/Acosta is legend, ACOSTA is legend. And you can get my work on MMA Junkie. I'm contributing to them currently. I'm also the MMA editor at thewellversed.com, which is a great entertainment site run by the former editor of BT.com, Andreas Hale. So check out all of my MMA work there. I got a lot of things in the works. I just put out a video with Mark Munoz called Quest for the Best for CageSideSports.com, and you can check that out on YouTube. Munoz obviously has the big fight against Chael Sonnen here in Chicago at UFC on Fox 2. So I'm always staying busy, always got a lot of things cooking, and I have some stories coming up in Fighters Only in the next 2 issues. So be sure to pick those up, and pretty much anywhere there's MMA, you can find me, and I appreciate you having me on, Jason.
Awesome, man. Listen, Danny, we're going to get together soon, and we'll definitely touch base after UFC 142. Fans, thanks so much for tuning in to MMA Talking Heads. You can catch us on the scroll on the bottom of the screen, and we'll see you next time on MMA Talking Heads.